In May of 2023, one of my best friends reached out and let me know that she was interested in going to the Renaissance Fair, and she wanted to see if I wanted to join her, which absolutely, I'll take any opportunity to spend some time with her. And then she told me that the Ren Fair was only a week away, which left me 7 days to create an outfit, which is a task that I took head on, and here is how I did it. Thank you so much for joining me here today at Big Picture Planet. As mentioned previously, I spent a lot of time a year ago creating a skirt for the Renaissance Fair, and I had a really specific vision in mind. I wanted something that embodied the flowiness and the volume of the cottagecore aesthetic, and I had just the perfect fabric. When I was young, my grandma made curtains for my bedroom, and they were beautiful at the time, but over the years they got faded and I may have somehow gotten yellow all over certain spots, so they were pretty stained. I don't remember how I did it, but anyways. And so this fabric from the top to the bottom of the window was pretty faded. That did leave a good, I'd say about 3 to 4 feet underneath the window where it was still beautiful. You could see that white and blue pattern. And so I used mostly that fabric and a little bit of the faded section to give a bit of a faded ombre look at the bottom. Before I could even begin, I had to wait until my cat Charlie left my fabric of his own volition, because it's an unspoken rule. Well, I guess it's spoken now. You cannot move a comfortable cat. Next came roughly an hour of seam ripping all of my grandma's impressive yet frustratingly well-constructed work. This part took a while, but I'm glad that I did it because I ended up badly needing those 3 to 4 extra inches later on. Once I had everything undone, I moved on to ironing. This part really isn't necessary, and my ADHD brain would like to encourage you to skip it. However, it did make the fabric just a little bit easier to work with. I want the first layer of this skirt to hit my knee length, so with my waist to knee measurements, I went on to cut my curtain to a more manageable size. I'm actually going to hold on to that faded yellow section. As awful as it looks, it ended up dyeing really nicely, and I was able to make a top out of it, which we'll get to see a bit later on. Next, I needed a couple of measurements, including the width around my waist and the length from my waist to my hem. I found this helpful free tool from By Hand London, which used those measurements to calculate how much fabric I would need and how to arrange the cuts to maximize my fabric. Much more importantly, I am atrocious at math, so I'm very appreciative that it gave me the radius that I would need in order to cut the circle at the top of this skirt. Now, just a quick geometry refresher. A radius is the measurement from the center of a circle to the edge. For me, that measurement is 4 inches, meaning I'm going to need to measure 4 inches from where the center of that waist circle will be to the edge. Next, I'm taking that from that radius that I just drew all the way down from the waist to the knee. That's going to make a lot more sense in just a second when I start cutting, but first I'm going to trace out that arc with chalk. That makes it much easier so I don't have any accidental cuts. And, oh, Charlie came back. So here we are. That's going to be half of our circle. And once I held it up to my body, I realized that it was a little bit too small, so I trimmed just a little bit more. Now that inch that I took away, make sure you add that back to the bottom, so that way you have the length that you want. Here I am cutting that. And then because that's only half of my circle, just with the amount of fabric that I had, I didn't have enough for a full circle. So because that's half, I needed the second half of my skirt. So here are those 2 pieces. And then because of those yellow stains, I didn't quite have enough fabric to do another half. So the back of the skirt is going to be done in 2 quarters. Because I have a print on my fabric, you're not going to be able to see the seams. I did have one yellow spot that I couldn't cut around, so I'm just going to make a little teeny tiny wedge to hide it in another seam. So here is that little seam that, again, you should not notice because of the forgiving print of this fabric. And here are all of those pieces put together. It looks huge, and that's what's going to give us all of the volume that we want. So here are those seams. I'm stitching them up on all, that should be 3 different seams, or in your case, you may just have 2 if you're doing this in halves instead of with quarters. and then I put that on my serger. You can also do this with a zigzag stitch on a regular sewing machine. Now that these are all assembled, I'm going to add a gathering stitch at the top of the waistline. Now, I thought this would be much easier if I did it on a sewing machine, and granted it was faster, but I don't know what it is, but I really struggle to gather with machine stitching. So after I had completed stitching this with machine, I gave up and just did it all by hand. I did just a stitch along the top with a needle and thread. Whatever way works best for you will work well in this case. Just make sure that once you are done pulling the thread, that everything up top is equally gathered. You don't want one sparse spot and then some well-gathered spots. So evenly distribute the gathering, and also ensure that your measurements are the same width as your waistband. You can see here that I gave myself an extra inch. I'm actually just going to fold these in case I end up growing in the future. Next, I needed a waistband piece of fabric. I fortunately had just enough between these stains to make a perfect waistband piece. And for that, I took the width that I had wanted. So I wanted a good couple of inches, and then I doubled that to have 4 inches. And then I added a 1/4 inch on either side for seam allowance. This looks a little small, but this ended up being the perfect width that I had wanted. So we're gonna fold that in half, and on that side 1/4 inch, we're going to, you can either do a sewing machine or you can also use a serger to finish this off. And then I'm going to top stitch once it is folded right side out. And then I'm going to attach that to the skirt that we just made. So here is me, again, using a regular sewing machine. You can do this with a serger as well. Just note that if you do serge it, it will be hard to remove the waistband later on and adjust it if you want to make this adjustable as I did. So I had a little bit of overlap. That was me serging that side so it doesn't fray. And then here is the opposite side. I'm just going to fold that over. That extra inch will be the inch that I could let out at a later date if I do end up gaining or losing weight. Here is that piece folded down. It will not be visible on the outside while you're wearing it. You'll only be able to see it on the inside. So that's going to be nice and hidden. And I'm also going to roll over just a little bit. And you guessed it, that's the part that we can let out at a later date. Next, I'm going to hem the bottom of that top tier. This is mainly to prevent it from fraying. So you could just serge this piece. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I would like to figure out how to make that bottom tier detachable, so that way I could either have this a knee-length skirt or a floor-length skirt. I'm sure there's a way to do it maybe with zippers or hooks. I'm just not there quite yet. And I just don't know how to do that if sewing took this long. So let me know if you have thoughts. I would love to hear them. Now on to my zipper. I'm not gonna lie here, zippers are not my area of expertise. I am still learning, and it does not help that I lost my zipper foot as of when I was creating this skirt. I was in college in 2020 when the world shut down, so I had to move around a couple different times, and my zipper foot was misplaced. I have since found it, but in this video you can see I was struggling with my standard foot. This would have been much, much easier with the proper equipment, but we persisted as best we could. And you can see the zipper wasn't quite perfect, but it was functional, which is what I needed. And you can't really see any of the problems while I'm wearing it. So I would call that a win. For creating your zipper, I would highly recommend watching a YouTube video from someone who is much more skilled than I am with zippers. I admit to seam ripping this 2 or 3 different times before it worked properly. From there, I stitched the 2 sides of the skirt closed, closing the back. Here is where things began to get a little crazy. So I knew I wanted my bottom tier to go from the top skirt's hem down to about a foot below. So that's that piece that you see here on the left. And then I measured all the way around the bottom of that first tier hem, which ended up being 16 feet. And that was before I added a few feet for gathering purposes. So this piece is 20 feet long. I had absolutely no idea that it was going to be so long. And so I had to cut that into a rectangular piece and hem the top and the bottom. And it took me forever to gather all the way around. But now that is done, I am serging this closed so I have a complete circle. And then I am attaching that to the hem of the top skirt. That alone took me a very long time. I believe it took me, 30-ish minutes just to go all the way around with my sewing machine. So that's part of the problem with the detachability concept. I want to be able to convert this from a short skirt to a long skirt in a relatively short period of time. And as a final touch, I soaked the bottom few inches in some diluted bleach. I used 1/4 cup per gallon, and I left it in there. I left the bottom of the skirt in there for only 20 minutes to remove that yellow from the sun bleaching. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but it came out beautifully. I think my favorite part about this project is that the curtains that we started out with were what a lot of people would consider ruined. They were really stained and they were bleached by the sun. They were no longer usable in the capacity of curtains. However, we were able to give them an entirely new life as a top and a skirt. On to the top. So for this top, I ended up following a video from Owlypop. She did a wonderful tutorial on how to create your own peasant blouse with some really easy measurements. I have that linked below, so I'm not going to show you a recreation of her video. Please watch hers. So here I am taking the yellow fabric. Excuse the lighting, it was late at night and I clearly had my lights on way too bright, but here I am cutting that fabric into a few different squares, as you will go on to see in her video. My one regret is that I thought I wanted a seam in the middle of the front so that way I could tie it. In hindsight, I would only do that about halfway down because that seam was a little awkward in the front, but regardless, I still love it. And next I bought some dark blue dye. I have learned that with your first garment, you are going to get the best color. I, after this shirt, tried to dye some pillowcases and they didn't come out quite as nicely. The color just wasn't as vibrant. So first I soaked my shirt in water and then I stirred it for about 30 minutes and then I washed it in the washing machine as the box directed. And here is our final product. I was so happy with how it came out. The top that you see here is not actually the top that I made. This is my first attempt at a top. And it didn't come out quite how I wanted. It was falling apart. So here is a much better constructed top. The one that I made using the Owlypop tutorial. I love it so much. It is so versatile. As she shows in her video, you can tuck in the sleeves, you can pull the shoulders off the side, or you can pull them up top. This is so cute with the skirt that we've made, so you can wear it in a cottagecore style. I went on to wear this at a picnic for other bookish members of Los Angeles. Oh, here I am wearing the outfit at the Paravel picnic, which was cottagecore themed. And it was a tremendous success. I had to push myself outside of my comfort zone to go to a place like this on my own. I am so glad that I did it anyways because I made some really wonderful friends that day. I really hope that you try this at home, especially with fabric that is not easily used in other projects. I think you could take multiple different pieces of fabric and add them together in different layers and you could get a really fun, almost Lucy Gray type skirt if we're referencing the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, something that just feels kind of patchwork and quiltish. I think that would be so beautiful. If you do try this, please tag Big Picture Planet. I would so love to see it. And that is all for today. Thank you so much for joining me and for diverting fabric and textile waste from the landfill. Now we can give it so much life in the years to come.